Hello, my name is Douglas Robinson. I am a solutions consultant with Beyond 20. In this video, we will be discussing how to upgrade a Cherwell environment to Cherwell version 9.1.0. Now, on this environment, I'm currently running Cherwell version 8.3.1 and we'll be upgrading to 9.1.0. The very first thing that we need to check when we are upgrading is that on our test environment, we don't have, or our development environment for that matter, we don't have any outstanding blueprints for development that has occurred that hasn't been migrated to production. Because part of our upgrade process in this video is going to involve refreshing the current production system down to our test and development environments so that all of the systems are up to date, as you really can't test out a new version of Cherwell on an outdated system and confidently think that it's analogous to your production environment. So we really recommend that you take a czar backup of your current environment and restore it over your test and development environments before you move forward with upgrading on your production environment. And before we can do that, we want to make sure that any development that has been created on your dev or test environments has been migrated up. So with that said, on our test environment, which I have open here, we're going to, on our production environment, we would go to the administrator tool, which you should be familiar with by now, and open up the database page on the left side of the screen. And then we're going to select export data. Now this is going to allow us to export a czar backup of the system or a database backup, and it produces a czar, which is a compressed backup of all of the content in the system. Now we can choose to do all of the data, which is, everything in the system, all records, attachments, anything like that. Or we can choose only to include table structure, which will include all of your business objects and tables and all of your configuration data, just not the records in those tables. And then you also have the option to export the structure and vital lookup table data, which is used for validating fields and stuff like that. You have the option to exclude attachments, automation data, which can be useful if you have a very large database on your production environment that you're storing down to test or dev. These options are all up to you. And then finally, we can choose where we're going to save our database to. So I have a folder picked out. I'm just going to name my czar backup with the current date, so that if I go and look back at it later, I realize when this czar was taken. And then we can go ahead and back up our Cherwell environment. Now the next step after we do this is going to involve backing up any web config files or any other Cherwell system files that we've customized. You normally won't need to do, or you normally won't be customizing these files, but on the off chance that you have made changes to them, or if you're a customer that is using the Cherwell web forms apps, then you will need to go through and back up your web config files, as there is a credential that is embedded in the web forms web config file, and it does get overwritten when we upgrade. So for this, we would go through each of these folders and we would take a copy of the web config file that's located in each. I would say one of the most important ones, or one of the web config files that you're going to run into having an impact the most frequently would be if you used Cherwell web forms and you did not make a backup of your web config file, as this will frequently get overwritten and it relies on a username and password that is entered into this file in rich text, which you can see here with this add key login name and then add key login password. If these values are blank, you'll have to re-enter them with a Cherwell credential before you can use web config, or before you can use Cherwell web forms again. So that's something to keep in mind. So to back these up, you would just take a copy of these and you would throw them into a folder somewhere, and you would want to use some kind of naming structure or organization so that you could keep track of which file was, or which file belonged to which Cherwell service. In the interest of saving time and not having an extremely boring video, I'm not going to show you how to do that for each of these because the process is very much the same. In each one of these folders, you'll find a separate web config file that we recommend you back up and restore after you have upgraded to Cherwell version 9.1.0. After this, you will want to open your system's services dialog, which I will go ahead and open through Task Manager. The reason that we say you should do this is you want to take note of which credentials your Cherwell services are using to sign on to the local environment. If you're not aware of how this was configured at first, or if it's been a while, it is definitely recommended that you pay attention to how these are set up, as if you're using a service account, you will need to re-enter the credentials for that service account when we reinstall Cherwell. Now, by default, we can use the local system account, but if you're having Cherwell access network shares that require Windows authentication, or if you're having Cherwell sign into SQL using Windows authentication, you will need to make sure that you get the appropriate Windows Service account credentials noted before you start this installation, and you will want to make sure that you have the correct credentials for this account. Now that we've gone over all of that information, our next step is going to be to download the current release of Cherwell version 9.1.0. Now we can do this by going to cherwellsupport.com. We'll need to sign in. So once you've been signed in, you'll simply need to open the Downloads page to navigate to the download page for any of the Cherwell software that's available on the portal. You'll notice the current release version of Cherwell Service Management is usually painted at the bottom of the dashboard here for the Downloads page. To access this, you would simply select Download Cherwell Service Management in your appropriate language. You would select the current version, which is Cherwell Service Management 9.1.0, and then you would be taken to what is actually a document repository within Cherwell that contains the current version of Cherwell. We would just click on this link here to download the current version, and it actually functions as a pop-up. So if you have a pop-up blocker, then it will get blocked, so you'll need to be aware of that. Now, I'm not going to make you wait through my process of downloading this, as I do already have it on my local machine. So in my downloads folder, you'll see that I have a Cherwell disk image English 9.1.0.zip file. It's about 795 megabytes in size, so it may take a few minutes for you to download. You will want to have this step done in advance so that you're not taking a lot of time during your possible change management system or change window to download a very large file. So it is a good idea to have this part done beforehand. After you've downloaded the file, you'll need to extract it, and from there we can open the Cherwell disk image folder to open the Cherwell installation package. And in this folder you'll see one executable, which is labeled Cherwell Service Management Installation.exe. This actually opens a bit of an installation menu that you can use to guide yourself through either installing just the client, the server apps and the client, or the portal and browser apps. Now, in this video, we're going to be covering the server installation and the portal and browser apps installations. The client you would use only if you had just the installation software and you were installing this tool on a client machine, but weren't installing the server or portal and browser apps. So I'll start the Cherwell server installation. Now at this point, you'll want to make sure that you're installing Cherwell to the intended directory. By default, it's going to install to C, program files, and then Cherwell service management, and that would be program files x86 if you're running on a 64-bit machine. So if you do intend to install Cherwell on a separate directory other than the default, this would be your opportunity to change it. Now, for right now, I'm going to select that I'm not going to load any data. I'm actually going to restore and upgrade my copy of my database from production separately later on. And next, you'll select any of the services that you need to install on this machine. And then we can click Install. That is the bulk of our installation process. Now we'll wait for the installer to complete. And now we have successfully installed the Cherwell server applications. Next, we'll be installing the Cherwell browser applications. Now here we will be installing the Cherwell browser apps. Just like before, we need to run through and accept a end user license agreement. And in addition, we need to select which browser apps we're going to install. Now, by default, the Cherwell Web Forms checkbox here is not checked. So if you are currently using, or if you intend to use the Cherwell Web Forms service through IIS, then you'll need to check this box. It is not checked by default because there are some security concerns to be aware of when you use Cherwell Web Forms, which you should investigate before you start using Web Forms if you are not currently. And next we have the option to update auto deploy. If you have auto deploy configured on your machine right now, then you will want to update your auto deploy configuration so that the current version of Cherwell, which is version 9.1.0, the executable does get updated after you've installed Cherwell. You will want to do that. On this machine, I actually don't have auto deploy configured, so I'm not going to update it. And for many of you, if you're working on a test environment, you may not have auto deploy configured. And then again, we have the option to install the Cherwell browser apps to a specific directory, or we can leave it at the default. So now we've upgraded our Cherwell server applications and our portal and browser applications. And I do have one more step that I want to take before I go through the process of restoring that ZAR file. Which is going to be, I want to go to my email and event monitoring page, and I need to export the email and event monitor configuration and the email accounts. So after we restore this ZAR, we're going to be configuring Cherwell to use a test email account. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we still have the configuration for the production email account in case we need to restore that later on. We can do that by opening the Email and Event Monitoring Manager, and we can then go to File, and we can export the email monitor configuration in case we'll need that later on using the File Export option. And later on, if we need to restore that, we can do File Import, just the same. It actually exports and imports to a CED file. And to get to the email account to export, it's actually a little bit trickier than that, because in the default Edit Email Accounts and Settings page, you don't have an option to export an email account. However, if you go through the Email and Event Monitoring Manager, click on the Options screen, and select Email Accounts, you get a separate manager for the email accounts in a format in which you can export out to a CED file. So this provides a convenient way for you to back up your Cherwell email account configurations and credentials in between restores or upgrades or any other configuration changes. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this client here now. So now that I am ready to restore my ZAR file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the Server Manager tool. And on the Server Manager tool, I'm going to stop the automation process server if it's running, and the email and event monitor server. Now, I don't have these running on my current machine, but if they were, you would see server is running up at the top, and we would click the stop button right here to stop the server or service. The reason that we're doing this is because we don't want these services to automatically start processing events that we're going to run on the production instance when we restore the ZAR from production. So it is really best practice that on any Cherwell server that you're restoring a ZAR to, that you stop the automation process server and the email event monitor server and the scheduling server beforehand. We will start those up after we've finished the ZAR restore, but beforehand we need to have those off. And our next step can be to restore the ZAR file. So to do this, we're going to open the System Restore tool, and we're going to browse for the ZAR file that we're restoring. So here is the ZAR file that I backed up earlier today. We can see that it was taken from a 8.3.1 environment. I'm going to choose an existing connection to restore to. Now, you likely only have 1, 2, or 3 connections. I have many connections on this demo or development environment, but you'll just choose the connection that your database is currently located in, and we will select delete existing tables because we are overwriting the database with the ZAR that we're restoring. And then we'll click import. Now when we do this, we're going to be prompted to log in. Now on your environment, ideally you have an administrator account that is not the default administrator, and if you are using the default administrator, you're not using the default administrator password, which happens to be the same as the default administrator username. So as a quick note, since we have a login screen on the screen, you should be very aware that you don't have any default password set up for your CSD admin account, as it is an administrator. So now that we've logged in, we're going to be prompted to overwrite the current system. I'm going to click yes, which means that we're going to overwrite the existing test database with the database that we received from production. And it is here that I would like to note explicitly that I am restoring the ZAR from this machine onto itself for this example. Obviously, you will have a separate server for your test environment and your production environment. Also, while I'm waiting for this to restore, I would like to also point out that earlier I mentioned that you would need to keep a copy of your service account information for your Active Directory configuration for your services. However, that is only necessary if you have uninstalled the Cherwell applications before you upgrade. If you run the installation for the upgraded version while you still have Cherwell installed, as you noticed, or as you may have noticed, it actually does not prompt you for that service account login information. So here we're going to see that the database needs to be upgraded. I'm going to click OK. When we do this, again, we're going to be prompted to log in. Again, I'm going to say, I hope you don't have the default username and password set on your administrator CSD admin account. Alright, now our upgrade has been completed. Took all of about 40 seconds. And now I'm going to open the Cherwell Administrator application and sign in. Oops. I'm going to try. Going to select my connection, and here we can choose either the 2-tier or 3-tier connection if you have your application server running. And now I will need to enter a license code, which coincidentally you do need to log in again to do, as there are separate rights in the environment for whether or not a given user can enter a license code. There is a separate user account license or security rights check So here you'll need to enter in your company name and your company license key that was issued to you. And after that, you'll be signed into the tool with the credentials that you initially provided. Now, once you have signed back into your Cherwell environment after you've restored the czar and upgraded the server and browser apps and the database, the first thing that we're going to do is go into the settings page of our administrator tool and click the link that says Open Stored Values Manager. In the Stored Values Manager, we're going to search for an item that says Current System. We're going to edit this stored value, and we want to make sure that this value is set to dev while we're on our test or development environments. The reason for this is that in the out-of-the-box content and in many expressions that are produced either by implementers or other people who are very familiar with the out-of-the-box content, there will usually be an expression placed on any email that's going out to a customer or a Cherwell user that checks whether this stored value for a current system is set to dev or production. The reason for that is if this is set to dev, then usually there's going to be a dev email recipient configured in a separate stored value to receive any test emails that are sent out from your dev or test email environment. So we do need to make sure that that current system stored value is updated, and we do also want to make sure that we have an appropriate value in the current system dev email recipient if you would like to have your test or dev environment sending out emails to a test or development email recipient. Alright, next we're going to clear out our automation processes. Now, we're going to go to the automation processes. I'm going to call this a tab, but really this is just a page. We're going to go to the automation processes page within the administrator tool, and we're going to click on the link that says individual automation process status. Once we have this dialog open, we're going to select the file menu, and we're going to click clear all processes. Now we have the option to clear scheduled activities, clear in-progress items, as well as scheduled activities, and also to clear the completed item history. Now, we don't need to clear the completed item history. This is just going to clear out statistical data or historical data on when certain automation processes completed and any error messages associated with them. But we do want to clear any in-progress and scheduled activities because when we restore this database onto test, you might have records that were created on production that were going to be acted on from production right before you exported your system out. So it is a good idea or a good practice to clear out all of your automation processes immediately after you have restored your database from a czar. Next, we're going to go to the email and event monitoring page, and we're going to go to the email and event monitoring manager. We're going to go to the if we backed up our email and event monitoring manager and we need to restore our email and event monitor, we can do so using the file import menu and select a Cherwell export or CED file. And if we backed up our email accounts and need to restore them for any reason, we can also go to the email account manager, as we just did, and import them here. But really what we're going to do once we're on this screen is we're going to change our existing email accounts that are being used that were configured for production to be a test or development email account, so you're not having email come out from the system from an inappropriate address. So if you're going to be sending email from your test or dev environment, it is important that you go into your email accounts dialog and make sure that you're using an appropriate email for your test or development environments. Next, we're going to go back into the Server Manager tool. And at this point, it would be appropriate for us to start the services up again that we had stopped earlier or that had been stopped as part of the installation process. So we would start our application server, we would start our automation process server, we would start our email and event monitor server, and we would start our scheduling server. Now, whether or not you use the configuration scheduling server is going to depend on your configuration and your implementation of Cherwell. The rest of the items in this server list are going to be based on the Cherwell browser apps. Now, these are all hosted within IIS. Now the next step of our upgrade process is going to involve restoring those web config files that we definitely went through and backed up during our upgrade process earlier on. So you would take any of your web config files that you had backed up and you would go back to the installation directory for your Cherwell browser applications, and you would replace the web config in the directory with the web config files that you had before. Now, if the structure of that web config file has changed due to a very large upgrade, and we don't believe that has happened on this version, but if that happens in a later version and the structure of your web config file changes, you may run into issues if you're replacing the web config. However, if you're making changes to your web config file, you do need to be aware that this file gets overwritten as part of the upgrade process, and you will need to make sure that those changes get recreated on the new web config file if you're not directly overwriting it. Next, after we've restored any web config files that we needed to back up or preserve, we're going to restart IIS. The simplest way to do this is to run the command IIS reset or IIS reset.exe, or we can directly go into IIS and reset it using the fancy button to reset IIS. So we can go to the Manage Server section, we can click Restart. That is all. So next, you would want to QA your test environment and validate that all of your workflows and integrations and other processes were functioning correctly. So this would usually involve signing into your Cherwell Rich client and your Cherwell browser and portal applications and running through several of your existing processes to ensure that everything is functioning correctly on the new version. If you have any questions about any activities in a typical Cherwell upgrade or restore that aren't covered in this video, you can definitely leave them in the comment section below, or you can reach out to us on Twitter or via our YouTube channel. And in addition to that, I would like to note that if you have more than one Cherwell application server where you have your application and browser apps installed, you will need to perform these installation steps on each of those servers. Now, if you've only got one database and you have many different application servers, then you'll only need to run through the steps for actually installing the server and browser apps, and you won't need to go through restoring a ZAR 5 or 6 different times for 5 or 6 different servers. They're all connected to the same database. But you do need to be aware that every server that you have needs to be upgraded in order for them to function properly on the new version. If you are a hosted customer and you have a local Cherwell scheduling server, you do need to make sure that your local server is upgraded to the appropriate version at the same time that your Cherwell SaaS environment is upgraded to a new version. As I mentioned before, you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/beyond20llc or on Twitter at beyond20.